Hi guys, hope you had a good half term. This is the Black Panther, first Black Panther presentation I'll be doing. Black Panther comes up in Component 1, Section B, so that's the first year exam. And Section B is the audiences on, and audiences and industries bit. Blimey, can't talk. Can't talk. I've had a couple of weeks off and I've forgotten how to do this. As you know, we're going to be comparing this with I, Daniel Blake. So you had the two I, Daniel Blake presentations before the half term. And this is the first of the Black Panther ones. There might be a few Black Panther ones because there's a couple more things we need to discuss. So in today's presentation we will cover industry. Who made Black Panther? I think you might know who made Black Panther already, but we will get into that. Conglomerate. Look, all two things came up there at once. I didn't realise that. Conglomerate. The Walt Disney Company. So we're going to talk about the Walt Disney Company and how they are a conglomerate, and that word you need to know. And we're also going to be talking about media theory. That jumped up rather prematurely there. So we're going to be applying some media theory to this. So let's get into it. So Black Panther was made by, surprise, surprise, Marvel Studios. Marvel Studios, that classic studio who brought you all those franchise films. All the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or the MCU as it's referred to. So Marvel Studios. We'll talk a little bit about Marvel Studios, and I wonder who owns Marvel Studios. Well, it's a Walt Disney Company, isn't it? It's Mickey there. Look at him, how proud he is to be owning. I own Marvel. He's thinking. Well, he doesn't just own Marvel; he owns a lot. They are a massive company, as I'm sure you know. They are one of the biggest companies in the world, one of the biggest media companies in the world. They are considered one of the big five. So there's not really that many film studios around anymore. There's Disney, there's Universal, there's is Paramount still around? I think Paramount is. There's Warner Brothers. That's kind of it, I think. Oh, Sony, if you count them. If you count them, they're struggling, aren't they? But that's basically it as far as film studios goes. And Disney is by far and away the biggest company there. Worth around about, I believe it's around about 150 billion. Might be 200 billion now. They are worth a lot less than, unfortunately, than Apple TV, Amazon, and Netflix, who are the new giants. But as far as the sort of the old media giants go, the Walt Disney Company is one of the biggest. Walt Disney Company is one of the biggest conglomerates in the world. I think I just stressed that on the last slide. It is both vertically and horizontally integrated, so hopefully you remember what that means. Vertical and horizontal integration refers to production, distribution, and exhibition. So you are vertically integrated if you have the ability to do something on each of those stages. If you can produce a film, if you can distribute it, and if you can exhibit it somehow. So Disney has production studios, it has distribution and marketing companies, and it also has cinemas, and it has Disney Plus. You are horizontally integrated if you have more than one company on any one of those layers. So if you own more than one studios in the production section, if you own more than one marketing or distribution companies, or if you own more than one distribution arm, so like more than one TV channel or cinema. So Disney has all of that covered. If you look at that image on the right there, it's probably a little bit small to see, but you can Google these images quite easily and look at them. And it shows you the ownership of Disney's stuff. And it owns so much. So it owns many different companies across many different areas of the media and theme parks as well. As you know, I love those blooming theme parks. It has bought some of the biggest IP, so IP means intellectual property, IP, in the media today. Let's have a look at some of this IP. Well, there's some of the big names. Star Wars, Pixar, 20th Century Fox, Marvel Studios, and the Muppets. I love the Muppets. I don't think they get quite enough credibility anymore, but, oh, Kermit. Anyway, so they own all those studios. They're a big, big company. They obviously also own Disney Pictures as well, and they own a few other things. So that's them. Huge, huge company. Lots of money behind them. Because they're vertically and horizontally integrated, it means that they have a lot of ammo as far as marketing and distribution and exhibition goes. I mean, when you can compare that to Idennell Blake, well, think how different that is. I mean, Idennell Blake was a co-production of many companies because they didn't have enough power to do it on their own. Disney is so powerful, they own lots and lots of companies, so it really is the mirror image. So let's talk a little bit more about one of the companies they own. Marvel Comics. I love Marvel Comics. I love comics. Marvel and DC, the two big ones, they're called the big two. I, I love Marvel characters the most, but I have to admit that the Marvel comics tend to be not as well written as DC. DC stuff's really great. But we don't need to go into that. Let's just talk a little bit about Marvel Comics. So, some basic stuff. Marvel actually started in 1939. They weren't called Marvel Comics at the time. I don't actually know what they were originally called. I know they were called Timely Comics at one point. I know they were called Atlantis Comics at another time. They didn't have any of the characters that you know and love today, apart from Captain America. Captain America is the first character that was created before they were called Marvel. I think Submariner was the next, very early, but all the other characters in the days of those comics have sort of fallen by the wayside. They became Marvel in 1961, and the first comic they produced that was popular was Fantastic Four. So the Fantastic Four is called the first family of Marvel because they were the big comic that made them popular. Really, it was the success of the Fantastic Four that led to everything else. Marvel has a huge established fan base, producing media across print, TV, radio and audio, and toys. So, yeah, Marvel has always covered many areas in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s. It's always produced lots of different things. In fact, in the early 70s, you used to be able to get Marvel vinyl, like records, with the writers like Stan Lee and Steve Ditko talking about their characters on it. Radio plays. When I was a little kid, I used to get Marvel animated like videos, VHS videos of cartoons. They weren't even really cartoons. They were like a recording of a pop-up book. It was unbelievably bad. If you can maybe try and Google or YouTube Captain America 1970s cartoon. It's so bad. I mean, it's appalling. You could do better with your phone, honestly. But anyway, so they've had a real variety, Marvel, of media that they've produced, and they have got a huge fan base. But despite having a huge fan base, Marvel went bankrupt in the 90s, and this is quite a key thing for Marvel. So the comics just weren't selling. Comics in general in the 90s were pretty bad. I know this because I was a big collector in the 90s, and they were pretty weird, strange stories. The artwork was kind of strange. Comic sales really went through the floorboards. They didn't do very well at all, and Marvel owed a lot of money to a lot of people, and they went totally bankrupt. So rather than being closed down altogether, what they did was they sold off the movie rights of some of their characters to some studios. So 20th Century Fox got hold of the Fantastic Four, and they got hold of the X-Men, and all the subsidiary characters in the X-Men, so that would be Deadpool as well, and other stuff like that. Sony got hold of Spider-Man. I don't know if Sony was the first studio to get hold of Spider-Man. I think it originally went to Columbia, but then Sony bought Columbia or something like that. I mean, we don't need to know the details. What we do need to know is that Marvel went bankrupt in the 90s and sold off the rights to many of their characters then. They also teamed up with Perlmutter Toy Biz. So Ike Perlmutter, you may have heard that name possibly. He's now in charge of all the Disney TV stuff, or he was. Sorry, not the Disney stuff, the Marvel TV stuff. Or he was, but that may have changed now that Disney Plus has come out. But when they had the Daredevil stuff on Netflix, all of the Jessica Jones, Daredevil, Punish, all that, he was in charge of all that, and he owns a toy company. So he sort of bailed Marvel out of their problems in the 90s. I've just realised that every slide I start by taking a big, deep in-breath of breath, if that's quite the right way to say it. So sorry if that sounds disgusting, but it's just me breathing. Anyway, Marvel Studios. So Marvel Studios, the film section of Marvel Comics. They've been trying to do films for a very long time, Marvel Studios. Since the 90s at least, they've had a few attempts at doing different films, trying to get funding for films and do TV shows and animations and stuff like that. They've been messing about with it certainly from around the 90s, and certainly once they were in trouble and they were getting funding from Perlmutter, that's when they started thinking we need to branch away from comics and into producing more things. Their first success, though, was Iron Man in 2008. This was a huge success. It was quite a gamble at the time. Robert Downey Jr., I think he got paid. Well, I mean, Disney did not want, not Disney, sorry, Marvel did not want Robert Downey Jr. I should just say at this stage, Marvel are making these films on their own. They're not connected to Disney at this stage, so we'll get to that in a minute. So in 2008, they made Iron Man, their first film. It was directed by Jon Favreau, who's now doing The Mandalorian. And it starred, as you know, Robert Downey Jr. And Marvel did not want Robert Downey Jr. to be Tony Stark. He was almost completely unemployable at the time, being a sort of an alcoholic, drug addict, and been in prison a few times. But Jon Favreau argued hard, and I think Robert Downey Jr. got paid about 70 grand for that first film, so not very much at all. He accepted the low fee because he really wanted to play the role, and it's really lucky that he did, because it was part of its success was down to him and down to Jon Favreau. The film was such a huge success, I mean absolutely massive success, that a year later Disney buys it. So literally the next year after the success of Iron Man, Disney are like, no, we're having a piece of that. So Disney came in and they bought Marvel Studios in 2009 for $4.24 billion. It's a lot of money. That's around about the same they paid for Star Wars. They paid the same amount for Star Wars to George Lucas. When George Lucas got that, just a fun fact, George Lucas instantly donated half of that money to charity. That's nice, isn't it? Anyway, let's move on. So Marvel and Disney Studios are now working together. Marvel is owned by Disney Studios, part of the conglomerate of Walt Disney Company. However, when they signed that contract, Marvel did agree to let Disney did agree to let Marvel have Disney agreed to give Marvel minimal influence over the products. I've actually think I've said that wrong. What I'm trying to say there is Disney agreed that they would let Marvel have the most control over their films and they wouldn't interfere very much. That's what I've tried to say there, but I don't know if I got it across. So normally Disney obviously have a lot of say over the type of films that they produce. They agreed to let Marvel have a little more freedom. However, ultimately Disney has the final words. So although Marvel may have a little more freedom than, say, Pixar or the Muppets or Star Wars, it still has to do what Disney says. Black Panther is the 17th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I'm trying to think if there's a bigger franchise of films out there than Marvel in the history of films. Not that I can think of. I think Godzilla maybe in Hong Kong, but it's a huge mammoth behemoth of a franchise, a Marvel franchise, and it's the 17th film. There's now, how many have there been in total now? About another 4 or 5. 21, something like that. You guys probably know. I should know. I'm supposed to be a geek, but I'm tired. I'm old. I'm tired. So anyway. Black Panther is part of that huge franchise. Let's have a look at some of the benefits of being part of that franchise. So, benefits of the Marvel Cinematic franchise. Well, first of all, it creates a franchise synergy. Each film promotes each other, and they're sort of linked together. It almost becomes like you have to see every single film to be part of the series. So, it really helps, it helps market one another. The Marvel films and the franchise itself has a huge built-in fan base that is built from the 60s. So all those characters that have been around now for 60 odd years, they've, families have grown up with those characters. So huge backlog of fans they can sell to. They've also got a huge wealth of stories and characters to play with. I mean, so many, as I say, 60 years of characters, 60 years of stories, lots and lots and lots can be done with this franchise. Application of theory. So, how can we apply some theory to this? Well, first of all, there's Curran and Seaton, our old friends Curran and Seaton. What did they say? Well, they said that more variety of media tech companies would lead to more variety of media texts. Let me just say that again because I think I slightly faltered. More variety of media companies would lead to more variety of media texts. Well, Disney has swallowed up so many companies, is such a big conglomerate, and you could argue that they have sort of Disneyfied products. So, I mean, obviously, if everything gets made by Disney, everything is going to have a certain look and feel to it. There is some resistance to Disney buying any more properties at the moment because they can't own everything, and if they do own everything, where's the variety? So, yeah, Disney is a massive, powerful company, and they are motivated, I guess, to some degree by power and profit. And if we had more variety of companies, that would show more variety of products. David Hasmond-Hell. So David Hasmond-Hell says industry uses tried and tested strategies to appeal to us and minimise risk. They do indeed. Now, if we think about Black Panther, what were the strategies that they used with Black Panther to minimise risk? How is Black Panther less of a risk than I, Daniel Blake? I mean, let's see if we can list some of the things. Some of you might want to pause it here and try and list some ideas. Some of you will just listen to me say the answers. Either way is good. Either way is good. So here's some answers. Well, first of all, they were part of a franchise, a big, huge, successful franchise. So that's one way to minimise the risk. They work in a genre, the superhero genre, which is incredibly popular. In fact, it seems to be the only genre making any money at the moment at the cinema. It's produced by two huge studios working together. So Walt Disney Company and Marvel Studios, huge studios. It has stars in it. So big name stars within the film. It also has a fairly big name director, Ryan Coogler, who's quite a famous, up and coming director with a fan base, having directed Creed and Creed 2. It has a huge amount of marketing behind it, which we're going to get into in the next PowerPoint next week. But there is a huge amount of ways that it minimise risk. There's some of the ways. So there we go. Moving on, Steve Neal theory can be applied. Genre is recognisable but changes over time. Genre is important to the studio for purposes of marketing. Think to what extent Black Panther is following the sort of Marvel formula. To what extent would you say that Marvel has become a genre unto itself, maybe? Or Disney, is that a genre to itself almost? I know they're studios, but could you say there is they follow such a formula, it's almost become a genre to itself? How much of Black Panther follows the patterns of other Marvel movies? Have a think about that. You might have thought a little bit about that in the mock exam when you looked at Captain Marvel. That might have come up. Also think about how all of this will become relevant when it comes to marketing, when we look at that next week. So finally, we have some tasks for you, I am afraid, but relatively easy. Please could you write 500 words and explain the following? So a little kind of mini essay, I know essay is a scary word, but it's not quite an essay, it's more just a piece of writing that answers sort of these two things. Who produced Black Panther? So that's literally going through the studios that we've just discussed. The one thing I didn't include in this is a little bit about Ryan Coogler, the director. You could look that up. So I did mention it on the last slide, but he's a black director who has worked with he's worked in films that have a sort of black issue. So Creed and Creed 2 are his two big hits, I guess. He has a style to his directing, which is evident in Black Panther, but it's such a superhero Marvel style movie. It's hard to have any all sort of artistic kind of flair within those films. So um, I would say you see his style in the opening shots most of all, and then it tends to become typically Disney looking and sort of Marvel looking. So you might want to include him in that. So, who produced Black Panther? You just need to talk about the studios, a little bit of history about the studios, and mention all the key things about conglomerate, vertical integration, horizontal integration, and stuff like that. Also, discuss how they minimised the film's risk. So, that was, again, I talked about that very briefly on the last page, but think about what were some of the things they did to minimise risk. Would that be using stars? Genre theory, some of the powerful studios working together, franchise, built up fan base, all of those things. This will be submitted next week, so please make sure you complete it. If you have any questions about that, you can email me. Hopefully it's relatively straightforward. Honestly, all the answers to those two questions are contained within this PowerPoint. I hope it hasn't been too shambolic. I know that I do a lot of erming and a lot of deep breaths and stuff. I don't have notes in front of me. I am doing this ad hoc, so hopefully it's enjoyable for you and interesting. And that just leaves me to say, thanks a lot, and see you next time. There's a little fella again. Look, we've got matching coats on this week. Isn't that amusing? Anyway, thank you guys. Thanks for watching this. We'll have a lesson sometime this week, and more PowerPoints and more videos to come. Thanks a lot. Bye.